Hi guys, and welcome to my 7-day Loose Floral challenge. This is a free daily challenge that's going to teach you everything you need to know about painting loose florals. It's perfect for anyone who wants to get more expressive and loose in their painting, and it's also great for beginners too. We'll be starting out with some of the basic foundational things that you need to know, and then every day we'll be building on those techniques to create more complex and more advanced paintings. We're going to be applying the techniques to a new flower every day as well, so you're going to learn to paint 7 flowers in a week. All of the videos will be uploaded every day to my YouTube channel over the 7-day challenge, so you can paint along every day with me, or you can go at your own pace. That's entirely up to you. There will also be a Facebook group where you can share your work with other people who are doing the challenge, and you can also share your work on Instagram as well. I'd love to see what you create. Okay, so for day 1 we're starting with daisies. Now these are some of the simplest flowers to paint, and that's really important. Daisies are a great one to start with because they have such simple shapes, and that's really what's going to help us with our loose floral painting. Now when we talk about loose floral painting, what we mean is that we're using loose expressive strokes. We're not focusing on rendering every detail of the flower or creating something that's hyper realistic or an exact replica of a reference photo. Instead we're going to use broad strokes and just have fun. And daisies are perfect for that because we can really strip back the detail and just focus on some of the basic elements that make up the flower, and it will still look recognisably like a daisy. Okay, so in today's lesson we're going to be focusing on 3 things. So capturing form and shape in loose florals, the basic brush strokes that you need to know, and using wet on wet techniques in watercolour. Let's get painting. Alright guys, let's get painting. Now, before we start, just a quick note on supplies. Now, you can take part in this 7-day challenge with whatever supplies you have at home, but you always ask me what I'm using, so I'm going to tell you. This is Legion Stonehenge Aqua Cold Press paper, 100% cotton, 300 GSM. I've got it in a little block. It just means that the edges are glued in place so that it doesn't move when I'm painting. If you don't have a block, you can just tape your paper down to a flat surface, desk or table, or if you want to be able to move it around as you paint, I quite like taping it down to a wooden chopping board, so that's my tip. I'm also using my Winsor & Newton professional watercolour paints. Now I buy these in tubes and just squeeze them out into this palette and let them dry for a few days, and then they are ready to paint with. And we will be using Princeton Heritage 40/50 round synthetic brushes. I've got a size 8, size 5, I've got a bunch of other sizes elsewhere as well. And then finally we have 2 water cups, one for cool colours and one for warm colours. It just stops the water getting all muddy and then making the colours look dirty. If you don't have 2 water cups, you can just use 1 water cup and change it more frequently. Alright, let's get mixing some colours. So, first up I'm using a burnt umber for the centres. You can use any brown, you can add in a bit of black as well if you want it to be a bit darker. Might do that. Okay, then we're going to get it on the tip of the brush, like that, and we're going to hold the brush quite vertical, and we are going to just tap the paper to create little dots there. And we're just aiming to do this quite loose, just tapping away, not worrying about it being perfect, creating a sort of rounded shape. Okay, there we go. Next up we're going to mix the petal colour. So for this I'm using a cadmium red, and we want plenty of water in there as well. Cadmiums are quite opaque colours, so it helps to use a lot of water. And then what we're going to do is load it up on the brush, a nice loose mixture, and then we're going to touch the tip of the brush to the dots and then press and pull out and lift up at the end. So touch the brush, press and pull out and lift up at the end. And then to make the strokes a bit wider, because I'm using quite a small brush for this, I'm going to do it again on the side there and pull up to a point. Do the same thing. Press and pull out. You can see that the brown is starting to bleed into the petals. That's what we want. I'm going to take a slightly thicker mixture this time and go from the top. Press and pull. Out. There we go. You can use lots of smaller strokes if that's easier for you. And then we're going to add plenty of water and just carry on around the flower. If you think it starts to look a bit light, you can go back in with a darker red. I want a bit more water on that one. So you can see the idea here is that we're just moving around the flower, pulling out these petals. I'm going to use a dark one there. And where they touch, we're allowing the paint to bleed and touch its neighbours. And that's what creates a really nice loose effect. Now, what we're going to do for a bit of added contrast is go back to our brown and then just touch it to the edge of the petals where they're still wet and allow it to bleed out. There you go. That is the first loose floral. Now, if you want to neaten up the edges, you can go back and tweak any petals that you think might look a bit irregular, add some darker colours in there for contrast, and just tidy it up. But try not to worry about making it perfect. The idea is that these are loose, they're natural, organic, irregular shapes, and we're not worried about perfection here. So I'm going to paint another one kind of up here at the top. And mix up some more brown. Now, you'll see that I'm moving with these relatively fast. Now, that's for two reasons. First of all, we want the paint to still be wet so that it can all bleed together. The other reason is simply to force me to stay loose. Now, it's a really good tip if you really struggle with loose painting, is to try and do it really fast. So set yourself, not like rushing, but set yourself a timer for like 5 minutes, and aim to finish the painting in that time. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever works for you. It forces you to make quick decisions and just keep loose and stay loose. You'll see that I'm not worrying about making this perfect. None of the petals are the same size. That's okay. And because I've worked really fast, the brown has bled out much better than in the first one. Now, you'll also see what I'm doing is adding more or less water to this. What I'm trying to do is change the value or the lightness or darkness of the petals. If we paint them all in the same colour, they're just going to end up looking like one big blob. And so we want to be always changing up how dark or light they are by adding more or less water or more paint, if that's easier. You can go back in and add some darker paint on the tips there or along one edge and allow that to bleed. I'm also going to go back in and darken the centre. As it's spread out into the petals, it's got a little bit lighter. And I want to keep the high contrast up with the centres. So I'm just going to go and drop some darker colour in there. There we go. I'm also going to fill in some of the gaps. I think that looks a little bit white. Right, now we're going to do the same thing, but imagine that we're looking at the flower from the sides. We're going to have the centre at the top and then pull the petals down. So, keeping the brown, I'm going to tap a little centre here. We want almost a half circle of nice dots. And then we're going to do the same technique with starting at the centre and pulling away, but we're going to only pull down. There we go. It helps when you're first starting to try and keep the petals relatively separate, and then you can control where they touch. If you're finding that they're starting to all blend into one and make a bit of a mess, that's a pretty good tip. And then you'll get better at being able to control where they touch and how that looks. When we get to the edges of these, we want the petals to be thinner, almost as if we're looking at them from the side. And come back down to a point. I'm going to add a bit more red into that one. Since it touches both its neighbours, sometimes the colours spread out and become a bit too light. There we go. I don't like how that's blending. That one's a bit too round. All right, perfect. So those are our flowers. Next we're going to add the stems and leaves. Now, a couple of tips for painting stems. A lot of people go in with the brush and just paint a big thick straight stem, and it looks really unnatural. Flowers growing in the wild tend to have curved stems, and so we're really going to focus on that shape as we paint the stems. The other thing you want to bear in mind is that you want your stem to attach almost to the flower centre, even if it gets hidden behind the petals. If you have a stem coming up and it stops here, it's going to look like this flower isn't on the stem. So I'm going to be using sap green for this. It's a really great colour for stems and leaves because it's a good mid-green. I'm going to mix up plenty because we want to do the leaves as well. And then I'm going to imagine that the stem is coming out of the middle and curving down. So it comes out there and then we start to see it. And then we're going to pull out a thin, curved, imperfect line. I'm going to do the same with this one. There we go. You can also allow it to touch the petals as well if you want it to blend together. I quite like how that looks. And then imagine that it's coming out this way and pull it back. For the leaves, we're going to use a similar stroke to the one with the petal, but what I'm going to try and do is leave a gap in the middle that works like a highlight. So, for example, if we pull out a little stem for our leaf and then press and push and pull it into a point, and then do the same on the other side and leave a gap in the middle. This just helps the leaves stop being too blobby. It doesn't need to be all the way, you can connect it at the bottom. You can make the leaves longer or shorter or thinner or fatter. Just make sure that you're changing up some sort of detail each time. I'm going to pull one up here. One of the most important things I think is not to worry about adding hundreds of leaves and filling all of the space with them. You just want enough that your plants look nice and healthy and leafy, but not so many that the leaves become the distracting part of the flower. Let's go across here. You also want to get into the habit of crossing over your leaves and your stems, because that's how they would be in nature. I'll pull one down here. Now, I'm not overthinking the composition of this, but I am following some really basic principles. So I'm trying not to create all of my leaves in a line. So they all have different start and finishing points. So I've got one down here, so I'm going to put one in the gap here. I'm going to make this round and curved down. You can see that they're not all the same size. I'm varying up the value. If I find that, all of these three leaves are a pretty similar tone, what I'm going to do is add a bit more green to some of them. Probably this one, make it really dark. And then add a bit there as well. The other thing you can do is add a dark colour to the base there. Okay, I think that's it. We don't want to make this too complicated because as soon as you start adding too many elements, it starts to look overworked. So this is a really simple, basic loose floral. All right, guys, there it is, our first finished piece. Okay, so today we've learned 3 foundational things. So how to use form and shape to create loose florals, some basic brushstrokes that you need to create petals and leaves, and we've also looked at how to use wet on wet detail in watercolour. Don't forget that you can share your work in the Facebook group and on Instagram. I'd love to see what you create. And come back tomorrow for day 2.